Certainly, the prospect of visiting the refrigerator where the corpse was lying did not give us any pleasure. Meanwhile, George and I had to visit the place 3 times. The first time we disturbed our major to try to photograph him and to find out what size clothes and shoes he would need. Then we found it necessary to pay Martin a second visit. We had to dress him for the journey. It is not easy to dress a corpse completely, starting with the underwear, but we managed to get him dressed quite quickly. But the boots, try to put them on a dead man and you will understand our difficulty. This was a major hurdle, and it took us quite a while to get over it. Our third visit was on Saturday, 17 April 1943, at 6 o'clock in the evening. We went to Major Martin's house to make final preparations for the journey. First, we put his personal letters, wallet in his pockets, books and everything else he was supposed to have on him. Then we added the small amount of cash that a man would normally have on him. The final list of items we handed to Major Martin was quite impressive. 2 personal insignia A, 2 letters from the bride, a badge depicting St. Christopher, an invitation card to the Cabaret Club, to pass to the headquarters of Naval Landing Operations, identity card, 1 £5 note, 3 £1 notes, 1 half-crown coin, 2 shilling coins, 2 sixpence coins, 4 1-pence coins, a letter from father, copy of letter from father to Mac Kenner Company, letter from Lloyd's Bank, a bill from the Navy Club, invoice from the Navy store, a bill for a wedding ring, 2 bus tickets, 2 tickets without stubs to the Prince of Wales Theatre, dated 22 April 1943, a box of matches, a packet of cigarettes, a bunch of keys, a pencil, a letter from the firm of McKenna E. Company. I'll explain where the tickets to the Prince of Wales Theatre came from. As I said, we went to fetch Major Martin on the 17th of April. He was to leave England on the 19th, to be put to sea near the coast of Huelva on the 29th or 30th of April. But if he had travelled by air, the journey would have taken him only 1 single day. After discussing this time difference, we decided to work on the timetable in reverse order. If we subtract from the date of Major Martin's arrival in Huelva, i.e., about 30 April, the 5 or 6 days during which the body could have swum to shore in the event of a plane crashing into the sea, this would give the date of Martin's departure from London, about 24 April. For this reason, the bill for the room at the Navy Club was marked with that number. But here George had another brilliant idea. If anyone saw theatre tickets with their stubs torn off, they would assume that they had been used, wouldn't they? Why don't we buy theatre tickets for the date when the body actually leaves London? So, according to our will, Bill Martin and Pam will spend a farewell evening at the theatre. We thought they would enjoy a visit to the Prince of Wales Theatre. We bought 4 tickets for the play, ripped the stubs off 2 of them, and put them in Major Martin's pocket. It must be said that the tickets played their part, while neither the Spaniards nor the Germans paid any attention to the bill from the Navy Club. And finally, a briefcase with important documents. Here we made a slight change in our original plan, of which I made Lieutenant Jewell aware. We were going to take the briefcase to Clyde separately from the container and leave it in Lieutenant Jewell's care. But then we determined that the briefcase would be better placed in the container with the body. We did so in order to secure the operation against any forgetfulness on the part of Jewell during the descent of the body off the coast of Spain. Lieutenant Jewell had serious difficulties in launching the body and securing the ship, and it would be a great shame if Major Martin was washed ashore and his briefcase was left in Jewell's safe. Having arranged the above items in Major Martin's pockets and secured the briefcase, we wrapped the body in a blanket to protect it from damage during the voyage. Even earlier, we set the container upright and filled it with dry ice. When the ice evaporated, we filled the container with ice again and let it evaporate again. We then lifted Major Martin's body, gently lowered it into the container, now filled with carbon dioxide, and covered it with pieces of dry ice. Finally, we closed the lid and tightened the bolts. Major Martin was ready to go to war. At last we were all ready. George, myself, John Horsfall, a motor racing driver on special assignments for the War Ministry, the Ford lorry, and, of course, Major Martin in his container. Our journey almost ended as soon as it began, and here's why. As we pulled out of the fridge and headed for George's flat in London, we noticed a long queue outside the cinema. It was people wanting to get in to see a new adventure film. And then we all had the same thought. We should stop and say to them, "Give up this film. We can tell you a much more interesting story, and it's not made up. Look in our container." One of us said it out loud, and we started laughing so hard that John hit a pole. But all was well. We got to George's flat in one piece. We had lunch there, taking turns looking after the lorry. If the thief had stolen our container, he would have been very disappointed, but certainly not as disappointed as we were. Then we made sandwiches and filled the thermos. Having finished our preparations, we set off for Greenock. John and I took turns driving the car. The journey was long and tiring. We drove, of course, with our headlights on. At one point we managed to skip over a section of road closed to traffic, fortunately quite flat and overgrown with grass. The murmur of aeroplanes overhead disturbed us. Seraph was sailing on the 19th, but we were in a hurry, as Lieutenant Jewell had asked us to arrive before noon on the 18th, in case of unforeseen difficulties in loading the container. All night we did not stop for a minute, taking turns to rest in the back of the truck. We arrived in Greenock early in the morning of the 18th and drove straight to the pier, where a boat was to meet us to take us to the Fort submarine base. This is where the trouble began. I foresaw the difficulties connected with loading the container on the boat, and therefore I warned in advance by a radiogram on behalf of the Chief of the Intelligence Department of the Naval Staff that we would have one place weighing more than 150 kilograms on our arrival, and asked for assistance in loading it. As it unfortunately often happens, the radiogram was distorted, and it said that our luggage weighed 150 kilograms and consisted of several pieces. As a result, our situation looked as follows. The boat was rocking on a large wave while waiting to be loaded, and the only man sent to help us, had no ropes and could do nothing for us. He fussed about the container, but it was quite clear that we could not safely lower it into the boat. I hurried to the headquarters to the flag officer, hoping to find support there, and happiness smiled on us again. The officer on duty turned out to be a girl from the Women's Auxiliary Corps, who had been attached to the communications department in Hull when I was stationed there. We met like old friends, and it was soon sorted out. I returned to the pier with half a dozen sailors and a rope, and we safely lowered the container into the hold of the boat. We soon arrived at the fort, where I handed Major Martin over to Lieutenant Jewell, together with a rubber boat, which he was to lower into the sea at the same time as the body. To stage an accident, we decided to leave only one folding aluminium oar in the boat and throw it upside down. I kept the other oar and still have it as a souvenir. Later it turned out that the rubber boat played no role. It was taken care of by Spanish fishermen, for whom the body was of no value. I hope it was of use to them. The container was loaded onto the submarine, and I made final arrangements for everything with Lieutenant Jewell. In the last conversation I suggested that, if possible, he should launch the body only in the presence of the officers. This minimized the number of people privy to the operation, and thus reduced the possibility of a leak. And we wanted to have as much assurance as possible on this point, for the story of the dead body dumped off the coast of Spain was so unusual and fascinating that even the most stalwart could not resist talking about it. If Jewell could confine himself to the assistance of the officers alone, he would naturally have to invent some story for the crew. The sailors will, of course, take notice of a cargo destined for Malta being hoisted on deck off the coast of Spain and then disappearing forever. At my suggestion, Jewell should have told the sailors that it was not optical instruments, but a meteorological buoy which they were ordered to place off the coast. If, however, the assistance of the rest of the crew was required to lower the body into the water, he would use the story as set out in the battle order. Having agreed on everything, we returned to London. The report on Operation Minsmith, which we submitted to his superiors, ended with the following. On 19 April 1943 at 18.0 English summertime, submarine Seraph went to sea, and so came a period of excitement. I had never doubted the success of the operation, but now that it was out of my control, I feared a breakdown. Strangely enough, I wasn't worried about whether the Germans would realize the deception. I was worried about the body. Would it make it to shore, or would it fail after all this effort? And at the worst moments, I even visualized the Seraph getting into trouble near Huelva, where she had to go according to our plan. My worries were helped by things to do, and I had plenty of them. And at least one evening during this period of languid waiting, we had a lot of fun. It was foolish to throw away the stubs if the tickets themselves were in Major Martin's pocket. We therefore, as I have said, bought then not 2, but 4 tickets, and put the 2 middle tickets of the 4 into Major Martin's pocket. George and I then invited Jill, the girl who got us the love letters, and Pam, who gave us her picture, to a farewell party with Bill Martin. We started the evening with a visit to the Prince of Wales Theatre. The administrator let us into the auditorium, only after we explained to him that a mate of ours had torn off the stubs of 2 tickets for a joke. We didn't tell him it was a joke on the Germans. After the theatre, we went to the Gargoyle Club for dinner. There we were taken to a table near which there was a sofa and 2 chairs. I suggested that the girls sit on the sofa, but Jill turned to George and said, "I wonder about Bill and Pam's relationship. They have only recently got engaged, and they are not going to sit next to each other during the farewell dinner on the occasion of his departure abroad." The couple at the next table looked at us and listened. "We've only known each other for a few days," I replied. After a short pause, I added that things would have been different if Pam and I had met sooner. Even my boss had admitted in an email recently that, although I seemed quiet, I was actually good at something. The couple at the next table looked at with even more disapproval, and then got up and danced. I can't help but tell you about another amusing incident that resulted from my identification with Bill Martin. Pam gave me a picture of herself with the inscription, "Till death do us part." Your loving Pam, quite a safe inscription, for I was already dead. I was staying with my mother at the time. Eager to see how she would feel about my infatuation, I put the picture on my dressing table. I was disappointed. She never said a word to me. About a year later, when my wife came back from America, I showed her the photograph. "So that's why your mother started writing in letters that she thought I should come home soon," she said, to my amazement. While we were waiting, the Seraph reached the coast of Spain without adventure. The first message received on the 30th of April, via a prearranged communication system, was that Operation Minsmith was complete. This was followed by a report from Lieutenant Jewell, sent from Gibraltar. Personal and top secret. From the commanding officer of the submarine Seraph, 30 April 1943. To the Chief of Intelligence of the Naval Headquarters. Copy to Lieutenant Commander E. Montague. Personally, Sergeant Bichel and Smith. 1. Weather. Wind variable, southwest to southeast, force up to 2 points. Swell, 2 points. Sky draped with low clouds. Visibility 1 to 2 miles. Barometer 10-16. 2. Fishing boats. There appeared to be many small fishing boats in the bay. The nearest was on the left at a distance of about 1 mile. There was no reason to believe that a submarine had been sighted. 3. Operation. The time of 430 was chosen for 2 reasons. Firstly, it was closest to the time of full low tide, and secondly, in this case, the submarine had time to leave the coastal area before daylight. The container was opened at 4:15. The body was removed. The blanket was removed. The briefcase was securely fastened and the life jacket was inflated. The body was lowered into the water at 4:30 sharp, about 8 cable meters from the coast. It swam towards the shore. The rubber dinghy was launched inflated, upside down, about half a mile to the south. The submarine then moved off more seaward, and a water-filled container with a blanket inside was thrown overboard. The container did not sink at first, but after being shot at with rifles and pistols at very close range, sank. The place where the container sank was 37° north latitude, 70 west longitude. The depth of the sea, according to measurements, was 564 meters. The report of the completion of the operation was transmitted at 7:15. A water sample taken near the coast is attached. Lieutenant A. Jewell. I later received a more detailed report of this operation written by a SERAF officer. It came to me second-hand, and as the intermediary is a journalist by profession, his description was much more vivid than what I could have written, so here it is verbatim. The submarine SERAF emerged from the shadow of her floating base and headed down the River Clyde. The commander, he was barely 29 years old, saluted from the fighting deckhouse and went below. Of the 5 officers and 50 sailors aboard the SERAF, he was the only one who knew the secret of the strange cargo. The cylindrical steel container was in the forward compartment of the submarine. The sailors who loaded it made jocular remarks about John Brown's body. There were many witticisms about our new sailor, Charlie, as others called him. Today, 10 years later, these 50 former SERAF crewmen would marvel to know how close to the truth they were. At the briefing before going to sea, they were told that the metal container contained a secret meteorological device that was to be experimented with off the coast of Spain. The container was indeed labelled "Handle with Care, Optical Instruments, Special Dispatch." For 10 days, the SERAF travelled in an underwater position, and the crew did not see the sun. They surfaced only at night to Huelva, which is located in the southwestern part of the Spanish coast, approached undetected and exactly on time, 29 hours. The place chosen for the descent of the Major Martin was about 1,500 meters from the mouth of the Huelva River. In the afternoon, the SERAF surfaced to periscope depth. Approximately 50 fishing boats were seen through the periscope. However, fog helped the submarine avoid detection. She then went deep for the rest of the day. When the SERAF surfaced again, it was completely dark. The young moon had already set. It was nearing high tide time. From the fighting deckhouse, 5 officers came on deck. The sea waves splashed at their feet. A mysterious container was lifted onto the deck. After making sure all the sailors were down below, Lieutenant Jewell informed the officers that there was a dead body in the container. "What we have to do," he said, "is part of an operation to mislead the enemy and force him to draw his defensive forces away from the area chosen for the main strike in the Mediterranean. The false plan for the invasion operation will be conveyed to the enemy with the help of this man, Major Martin, who has been the victim of an aeroplane crash over the sea. Huelva was chosen because in this area local collaborators are actively supplying German agents with military information." Now that's the kind of story you're suddenly stunned by in the Atlantic Ocean. The 4 officers, undoubtedly shaken by their commander's dramatic and frightening message, concealed their excitement. Only one of them said, "Doesn't a dead body bring bad luck?" Then all 5 set to work. 2 watched the sea while the others, led by Lieutenant Jewell, began unscrewing the bolts on the lid of the container with a spanner. 10 minutes later, the container opens. The body, wrapped in a blanket, was carefully removed from the metal coffin. For a moment, the tension subsided. The officers stretched out in silent respect for the dead man. Lieutenant Jewell knelt down, untied the laces, and removed the blanket. A final inspection followed. Was the Major's uniform and insignia in order? Does his hand hold the handle of that extremely important briefcase? Was the briefcase well fastened to his belt? Everything was in order. Jewell bent down and inflated the Major's life jacket. There was only one thing left to do, although it wasn't required by them. The 4 young officers bowed their naked heads, paying their last respect to the deceased, and their commander spoke the words of the funeral prayer he remembered. For them, standing there in silence, these words from Psalm 38 had a special meaning. I said, "I will watch my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth till the wicked be before me." See a slight push, and the unknown fighter swam to the shore on his last and important journey. Major Martin went to war. The risk that Lieutenant Jewell had taken in coming so close to the shore gave us every possible chance of success. All that remained now was to wait and see how Major Martin would play his part. On the 3rd of May, we received a report from our naval attaché in Madrid. It said that, according to the vice-consul from Huelva, fishermen had picked up the body of Marine Major Martin near the shore on 30 April. The body was handed over to the vice-consul and buried with full military honors. The very next day in the Huelva cemetery, with Spanish military and civilian authorities attending the funeral. The report made no mention of a briefcase or any official papers. And so began the exchange of radiograms between the Admiralty and the naval attaché. This is understandable. When Major Martin's death became known in England, the Naval Landing Operations Staff became concerned about the strategic information contained in Martin's paper. The possibility of a leak was absolutely catastrophic. Naturally, under the circumstances, it was necessary to urgently ask the attaché to try to get the documents at any cost. We did so, and several corresponding radiograms were sent to the attaché one after another. The first, dated 4 May, stated that Major Martin was carrying papers of a highly classified nature. We asked the attaché to make an official inquiry about them. If the Spaniards did not give him the papers, he should, very carefully, inquire at Huelva whether they had been washed ashore, and, if so, to find out what had happened to them. If they are found, the attaché must inform the Chief of Naval Intelligence personally of the names of those to whom Martin's papers were addressed. He must return them as soon as possible to the Chief of Naval Intelligence without opening the envelopes. This was followed by a second radiogram to this effect. Major Martin was reported to be in possession of 3 letters of extreme importance, and they were believed to be in a black briefcase with an official monogram. The attaché was again warned that he must on no account excite Spanish interest in these documents. As we learnt from the reply to our first radiogram, the Spanish naval minister, in reply to an official inquiry, said that the documents had been found and sent to Madrid through the Spanish Naval General Headquarters at Cadiz and would arrive in a few days. The attaché learnt that the vice-consul in Huelva had not seen the briefcase or the documents. On 13 May, the attaché reported the following. The chief of the Spanish naval staff had given him all Major Martin's belongings, including the black briefcase. The latter was open, the key being in the lock. Everything is intact, assured the chief of staff, and the attaché thanked him. In the attaché's opinion, the chief of naval staff was aware of the contents of the letters. At the same time, the attaché felt that we had no reason to think that he had passed this information on to anyone else. Fine, let's keep this officer out of the loop. But if he knew the contents of the letters, we could safely hope that their contents were known to others. Everything was going well. The leak had begun. We found confirmation of this in the following report from the attaché. On Saturday, 15 May, the naval minister spoke to the attaché about these documents. While at Valencia, he, the minister, learnt of the arrival of the papers at Madrid and ordered the chief of naval staff to transmit them immediately to the attaché. According to him, he did everything to ensure that no one had time to familiarize himself with the documents. Nothing had been said to the minister before he left Madrid that could have made him so anxious about the documents. It was clear that the envelopes had been opened, and since they had been, it meant that there was at least one Spaniard who knew what was going on and would pass the information on to the Germans. And how closely the Germans and Spaniards cooperated, we learnt only after the war. In the meantime, our cautious checking in Huelva had established details that were not yet known to us. The body was spotted by a fisherman who called for a nearby boat. The boat took Major Martin on board and brought him ashore. There the body was handed over to the officer who commanded the detachment stationed there. Then a military lawyer was called in. The lawyer took charge of all the major's papers and personal effects. The body was transported to the Huelva morgue for medical examination. The doctor who performed the autopsy determined that the man had fallen into the sea while still alive and that death was due to prolonged exposure to the water, 5 to 8 days. The German resident in Huelva, known to us, soon learnt everything about the body, including the names of those to whom the letters in the briefcase had been addressed. He tried to get copies of the documents, but without success, as neither he nor his accomplices had any contact with the lawyer. We had no doubts about success, but nevertheless we were waiting for a final check, and for that we needed Major Martin's documents. Finally, the documents arrived in London and were immediately submitted for examination. Before sending the body to Spain, we had taken some precautions, which now helped us to determine whether the envelopes had been opened or not. The results of the examination proved conclusively that the letters, at least 2 out of 3, had been taken out of the envelopes, although the wax seals appeared to be intact. When we added this fact to the reports received from Huelva and from the naval attache, we were quite satisfied. So the Spaniards had become acquainted with the contents of the letters. We could be firmly sure that they passed the information received to German intelligence. It remained to rely on the Germans, and they will certainly be able to take full advantage of the situation. We hoped that our faith in German intelligence operating in Spain will not be undermined. Now Berlin had to play its part. It was time to say goodbye to Major Martin. He had served his country well, and we felt it was our duty to see that his final resting place was dignified and that he was duly honoured. We were glad to show respect for him without jeopardizing an operation in which he had played such an important part. More than that, by fulfilling what our conscience required of us, we prevented the Germans from verifying the Spanish doctor's report. The frequent visits to the grave by British officials, or their representatives before the tombstone had been erected, of course, prevented the Germans or Spaniards from exhuming the body. First of all, we asked the naval attache to place wreaths on the grave from Palm and from the Major's family. Then we saw to it that the tombstone was placed as soon as possible. Finally, I sent a request to our naval attache in Madrid to thank the vice-consul in Huelva on behalf of Major Martin's family for all the attention he had paid to the deceased, and to ask him to take photographs of the grave. These photographs will be held sacred by the family and Major Martin's fiancée, to whom he had recently become engaged. The tombstone was made of plain white marble, and on it was carved the following inscription: William Martin, born 29 March 1907, died 24 April 1943. Beloved son of John Glynder Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales, dulce et desorum edsta roratria mori iargamo. We could do no more, though we felt indebted to him, and realized that many thousands of his countrymen and our American allies landing on the shores of Sicily would soon owe their lives to him. My confidence in this was by then shared by my superiors. I informed Lieutenant Jewell of the complete success of the operation. Since it was impossible to send such a message by radio, I wrote on an ordinary postcard, "I hasten to rejoice you that the Major is now well." The Chiefs of Staff Committee, sending a message to the Prime Minister, came up with a better one. "The stuffing has been swallowed whole." We waited for developments, and that's when we remembered that the Times was delivered to Lisbon by aeroplane, and that the Germans would probably keep an eye on the lists of dead and wounded published in the paper from time to time. So I checked how much time usually elapsed between the death of a serviceman and the reporting of it. It turned out to be no more than 5 weeks. So if Martin died on the 24th of April, his name on the casualty list should appear in the first week of June. What should we do? Is it worth publishing the Major's name in the pages of the Times, or is it risky? The invasion of Sicily was planned for the second week, July. It is unlikely that the Germans felt that this message should appear before our operations began. On the other hand, the landing in Sicily for some reason may be delayed. After some hesitation, we still decided to include Major Martin in the list of the dead. After all, we won't have to regret later that we didn't do everything we could. Later on, however, we regretted this little detail we had added to our creation. It caused us a great deal of trouble, but fortunately it did no harm to the cause. It was not difficult to organize the publication of Major Martin's name in the paper. We were still phenomenally lucky. The relevant Admiralty office readily acceded to the request of the Chief of Naval Intelligence to include the name of Major William Martin in the list of the dead. I don't remember how I explained this strange request. The message appeared in the Times, Friday, 4 June 1943. We will probably never know whether the Germans noticed it, and if they did, they must have noticed the names of Rear Admiral P.J. Mack and Captain First Rank T. L. Beaver on the same list. Not long before, the newspapers had reported that Mac and Beaver had been the victims of an aeroplane crash over the sea. The assumption that Major Martin died with them was self-evident, and he was put on the same list with the Rear Admiral and Captain First Rank by accident. I would like to think that the Germans read the Times of 4 June 1943 and noticed the list of the dead. It would be a pity if this fortunate coincidence went unnoticed. And suddenly trouble started. The lists of the dead and wounded were being examined by agencies that I did not know existed or had simply forgotten about. I realized what awaited me if the radiograms between us and the attaché in Madrid had gone through the usual channel. The Admiralty Wills Department wanted to know if Major Martin had left a will, and if he had, where was it? The Navy Medical Department wanted to know whether Major Martin had been killed in action, whether he had died of wounds, whether he had died in the rear, and generally what were the circumstances of his death. This was required for statistical reports. Fortunately, I had time to make sure that all inquiries about Major Martin were sent directly to me. I prevented them from spreading too widely, but I had to deal with the agencies that made the inquiries, and it took me a long time to come up with answers. I now appreciated the saying that a man who dares to deceive has no idea of the tangled web he will weave. However, I got into character. I told the chiefs of both departments that Major Martin's death could not be registered. He was a special agent on an important mission, and with the permission of the First Sea Lord, he had been promoted to the rank of Major of Marines for purposes of disguise. After all, my answer was true to some extent. I only forgot to mention that he died before he embarked on his important mission and was promoted to the rank of Major. With the permission of the Chief of Naval Intelligence, I persuaded the Chief of Wills and the Chief of the Navy Medical Department of the need for the strictest secrecy, and they took it upon themselves to resolve the problem in their respective departments. Thus was eliminated the greatest danger of leakage we faced. I should add that a few years later, when I was already demobilized, I was once summoned to the Navy Intelligence Department. They had again received a request from somewhere regarding Major Martin and wanted to know how I had handled similar requests in the past. That was the end of our involvement in Operation Minsmouth. We played our part. Lieutenant Ewell and Major Martin played theirs. And what did the Germans do? During the second half of May, June and the first half of July 1943, we did not receive any information that would bolster our confidence in the success of Operation Minsmouth. We hoped for the strength of German-Spanish ties and the gullibility of the Germans. The Germans had received documents so clear and convincing that they would doubtless hasten to congratulate themselves on the greatest triumph of their intelligence. We imagined the officers of German intelligence rubbing their hands in satisfaction. Their joy that the organization they had established in Spain and the system of close contact with responsible Spanish officials had at last proved its worth. German intelligence could now make amends for the guilt it had felt over the Allied landing in North Africa. To be able to present to his staff a copy of a letter from the Deputy Chief of the Imperial General Staff to the commander of a group of armies. For a scout, it is an amazing dream, the fulfillment of all his hopes and youthful dreams. With such information, the General Staff could have prevented a catastrophe or dealt the enemy a crushing blow at the most critical moment. It was for this reason that I strongly resisted the urge of some responsible persons to use our plan to pass on petty misinformation which might be contained in the correspondence of junior officers. If Major Martin's letters had been of that level, the Germans would hardly have made copies of them, and if they had, they might not have taken them into account in formulating strategic decisions. But what Sir Archibald Nye wrote to General Alexander must be true. The Deputy Chief of the Imperial General Staff must know the Allied plans. He cannot be the victim of an enemy disinformation operation, and if the German intelligence fell for the bait and took the letter as genuine, the Germans must begin to act too. No General Staff who received such information from his intelligence will not refuse to take it into account in the development of strategic plans. So we waited. It's the day of the beginning of Operation Husky. The landing was a success. The island of Sicily is, roughly speaking, a triangle standing on its apex. The Allies landed in the early morning of 10 July on either side of the apex and quickly advanced along the sides of the triangle and towards the center. Many factors contributed to the suddenness of the strike, such as bad weather and the period of the new moon, but this did not shake our group's confidence that Operation Minsmith had succeeded and that we had contributed to the success of the landing. As intelligence reports and other documents came in from Sicily, our view was confirmed. There was almost no doubt that the Germans had given up strengthening the defences of Sicily from the south and were busy organising defences on the western tip of the triangle and on its northern side. And this made sense if we intended to launch a diversionary strike on Sicily during the landing on Sardinia or attacked Sicily after the capture of Sardinia. But it was not just that in the period leading up to the landing the Germans had built up defensive fortifications mainly in the north of Sicily. It's much less strong than might have been expected. Turned out to be the entire defense system on the island and especially ineffective, the defense in the southern and eastern parts of it. The point of view of officials regarding the Operation Minstrel mated in the report of Admiral Cunningham, extremely effective diversionary operation and the right choice of routes of approach played a role. We succeeded in achieving a surprise strike. How much we owed our success to Operation Minsmith, it was possible to find out a few months after the end of the war. Here's how it happened. While awaiting demobilization, I was compiling a report on the work I had done during the war. This was required for those who would probably never choose to take the time to familiarize themselves with my notes, or who would decide that they were not worth reading. One morning, as I sat in my stuffy office in the Admiralty as usual, the telephone rang. It was the Deputy Chief of Intelligence of the Naval Staff, and he was laughing so hard I couldn't make out his words. With difficulty, I realized that he was summoning me to his office. When I went to him, he, still shaking with laughter, handed me a bundle of documents. I recognized them at once, though the words that caught my eye were written in German. Lieber Gossadmiral. These were the letters we had used in Operation Minsmith, or rather their German translations. They had finally finished their long journey. Sane Deputy Chief of Intelligence explained to me the reason for his laughter. The fact is that one officer was assigned to sort out and translate into English the archives of the German naval headquarters captured in Tambaik, Germany. That morning the officer translator came to him, extremely excited. This is what this officer reported. He had discovered 2 documents. One was a copy of an extremely secret letter from the Deputy Chief of the Imperial General Staff to General Alexander, and as the officer said, it seems to him that this letter is a gross breach of security regulations. So according to the rules in force, he should pass copies to the appropriate officers in the War Ministry, but foreseeing the trouble this case is fraught with, wondered if the head of the Navy Intelligence Department would want to deal with them himself. We started searching for other documents related to our operation. Soon we found data indicating our complete victory over German intelligence. As we expected, the Germans immediately realized the extreme importance of our documents for their main headquarters and wasted no time. At the beginning of the first week of May, their agent in Madrid reported to Berlin the contents of the documents and the circumstances under which they were discovered. The German intelligence in Berlin, on receiving this information, reacted as we expected. It demanded from Madrid data confirming the authenticity of the documents. The first message from Madrid was followed by a second, indicating that a thorough investigation, but time was running out. Berlin apparently appreciated the importance of the information and decided that the details already received from Madrid were sufficiently convincing, and the Germans sprang into action. I have before me the first important document, the conclusion of German intelligence, attached to the German translation of the letter of Sir Archibald Nye to General Alexander. It is dated 14 May 1943 and is stamped to be handed over personally only, not through the registrar's office, meaning that the documents were classified as top secret. The letter and the conclusion were handed over to the naval headquarters, and on 15 May the Chief of Staff initialed the letter and marked in blue pencil that the commander of the Navy, Gross Admiral Dönitz should read it personally. The latter did so, marking the documents in green pencil and certifying in his personal scrawl that he had read them. In addition to Dönitz and his chief of staff, the documents were read by 2 other officers. At the conclusion of the intelligence reads, "Captured enemy document on operations in the Mediterranean." Enclosed a translation of the captured letter from the Imperial General Staff to General Alexander. The conclusion of the General Staff. The other intelligence documents are irrelevant. A thorough examination of the letter, made by the 3rd Department of the Headquarters of the Leadership of the War at Sea, showed 1. The authenticity of the captured documents is beyond suspicion. The assumption that they were planted on purpose and the question of whether the enemy knows that the documents are in our possession and not lost at sea are being investigated. It is possible that the enemy does not know where the documents are. One circumstance against this is that the enemy certainly knows that they have not reached their destination. 2. It must be taken into account that the enemy may now change the plans of the intended operations or start them earlier, although this is unlikely. 3. The matter is regarded as urgent, but there is still time on 23 April to inform General Alexander through a courier of Henry Wilson's proposal to use Sicily as a diversionary object in an offensive in the eastern Mediterranean. Alexander is asked to state without delay whether he supports Wilson's view, as we cannot further postpone the matter. In this connection, the Imperial General Staff does not rule out the possibility of changing the existing plans of operations in both the eastern and western Mediterranean. There is apparently still time enough for this. 4. Sequence of operations. It should be assumed that both operations will be conducted simultaneously, since the letter states that Sicily is an unsuitable diversionary object for both operations. 5. There is reason to believe that the strike in the eastern Mediterranean will be made from the Tobruk area. Alexandria is not taken into account at all because in this case, Sicily cannot play the role of a diversionary object in 6. It is not clear whether action against the diversionary object will be confined to the period of commencement of operations or whether it will continue along with the actual operations. 7. It is not clear from the attached whether only the 5I and 56I divisions will land in the eastern Mediterranean. However, only these 2 divisions will be reinforced for the coming offensive operations. It is quite possible that only 2 divisions will take part in the offensive. 8. It should be emphasized that the document shows that great preparations are being made in the eastern Mediterranean. This is very important because, owing to the geographical position of the area where our forces are located, we have much less intelligence on enemy activity in that area than, say, in Algeria. When one reads this document, one is struck first of all by the fact that the German intelligence officers immediately bound themselves with the categorical statement, "The authenticity of captured documents is beyond suspicion." True. They stipulate for the sake of caution that the possibility of forgery and the degree of our knowledge of the fate of the documents are being investigated, but here they also note that the former is unlikely. In their view, we are unlikely to change our plans or launch an offensive earlier than planned. However, anyone familiar with the work of planning and preparing operations on a large scale will probably agree with this view. Another point illustrating the importance of looking at the operation you are preparing through the eyes of the enemy and based on his knowledge of the situation is paragraph 5. The Germans argued that Sicily could not serve as a diversionary target because the troops stationed at Alexandria were too far from the island. If our headquarters had read this thorough document, its reaction would have been different. Then we knew that this distance is quite surmountable, and the troops stationed in Alexandria can be used to strike Sicily. There is no need to examine in detail the other points of the German intelligence conclusion, as in the next chapter I will discuss the analysis of Major Martin's documents by the German headquarters. This analysis reveals the thoroughness with which every word and every hint in Sir Archibald Nye's letter was scrutinized. I have before me the second German intelligence report, dated 15 May 1943. Contents. On the official English mail which had been nailed to the shore in the neighborhood of Hulva. In a conversation held on 10 May 1943 with the Spanish staff officer concerned, with whom we have been in contact for many years, it was possible to ascertain the following. 1. In the hands of the corpse was an ordinary briefcase. Its contents: a blank sheet of plain white paper in which were wrapped letters addressed to General Alexander and Admiral Cunningham, each letter in a separate envelope with the usual form of address and addressed personally to the addressee. The sealing wax bears the imprint of the sender's personal seal, and the seals were in excellent condition. The letters which I held in my own hands were also in good condition. To make copies of them, the Spaniards had dried them and then placed them in salt water for 24 hours. The grunts of the pamphlet regarding naval landing operations and photographs referred to in Mountbatten's letter of 22 April. The grunts are in excellent condition. The photographs are perfectly deteriorated. 2. The courier had a wallet with personal papers in his breast pocket, including his military papers with photographs, a letter to Major Martin from his fiancée, a letter from his father, and an invitation card to a London nightclub dated 27 April. Consequently, Major Martin left London on the morning of 28 April, the same day that the plane crashed near Hulver. 3. The English consul was fully informed of what had happened, as might be expected. He asked for the documents to be handed to him. This request was refused on the pretext that all items found with the body, including papers, should be presented to the local Spanish magistrate. After copies were made at the Spanish General Headquarters, all the papers were restored to their original form. The envelopes appear to have been unopened, as I have seen for myself. They will be returned to the British today through the Spanish Foreign Office. From the point of view of our little group, it is an extremely curious document. It fully justified all the trouble of establishing Martin's identity. The Major's authenticity confirmed the authenticity of the documents he was carrying. At the same time, it became clear that, by chance, some details were given importance by the Germans, while others were left unattained. But the correctness of the basic premise of the operation was fully confirmed. In the Spanish headquarters of the Germans really had free access to everything that interests them. From this document, by the way, it follows that we worried in vain whether the fact that the briefcase was attached to the belt of Major Martin with a chain. The Germans were informed that the briefcase was clutched in the hand of the corps. Thus, we were helped not only by the cooperation of the Spaniards with the Germans, but also by the short-sightedness of the Spaniards. I did not understand the reference in paragraph 1 to a blank sheet of plain white paper in which the letters were wrapped. Either this was done by some Spaniard to protect the envelopes from contamination, or it is a sheet from the facets of a pamphlet on the activities of the command. At any rate, we did not wrap the letters with paper. In addition, the seals on the sealing wax were official seals bearing the royal coat of arms. As we noted with satisfaction, the personal letters in the wallet were not left unattended, so our subtle move with the bride's and father's letters had not gone to waste. Lord Mountbatten's letter to Admiral Cunningham, as the report shows, played its intended role. It helped to establish Major Martin's identity. But this report also reveals one of the greatest difficulties intelligence officers have to face in conducting disinformation operations. Those who conduct them must provide the enemy with material that will lead him to draw the conclusions they want. For this reason, both the ability and intelligence of the one who will analyze the material must be taken into account. I believe that our conclusions about the intelligence of the Germans were correct, but we perhaps overestimated their abilities. The German intelligence men negligently made two extremely gross errors, both in regard to dates. They were remarkably careless and did not take care to write down the dates correctly. The letter was dated 21 April, and the Germans, either when they photocopied the letter or when they translated it into German, substituted 21 April for the 22nd. In this case, it made no difference. The second error is far worse. There is a reference in the report to an invitation ticket to a London nightclub dated 27 April. We conclude that this is the result of careless examination of theatre ticket. The second two were probably blurred. The invitation to the cabaret club had no date at all. and it is unlikely that the Germans meant the bill for the stay at the Navy Club, dated 24 April, since, as it does not look at all like a ticket to the club, and even the Spaniards would probably not have been mistaken about it. We therefore conclude the error was due to the Germans confusing the theatre ticket and the invitation to the Cabaret Club. Errors in dates could have led to serious complications for us. It appears from the report, as we wanted to suggest to the Germans, that Major Martin flew out of England the day after the farewell party, but because of an error in the date it was, according to the Germans, on the morning of 28 April, the very day the plane crashed near Hua. If the Germans had examined the Spanish doctor's report in the part of it that refers to the day of death and linked it to the date of departure, they might have suspected something wrong. The Spanish doctor not unreasonably surmised that the plane crash occurred at least 5 days before the body was found, so the crash that killed Major Martin must have occurred around the 25th of April. I am a poor philosopher and cannot say what might have followed this conclusion. Perhaps there will be people who will say that we were simply lucky, and if someone had pointed out this discrepancy, our operation would have failed. I hope I won't be accused of being too egotistical if I disagree with that statement. We provided the Spaniards and Germans with all the necessary data from which they could draw the conclusions we wanted. It would be absurd to say that we were entitled to rely on the comparatively competent and intelligent cooperation of the opposing side, but we are entitled to say that we provided the Germans with all the necessary data, and the Germans drew the right conclusions from them without paying attention to the mistakes they had made. At any rate, the Germans believed that Major Martin was on his way to Africa by aeroplane, and that the crash took place on such a day as does not contradict either the alleged date of the Major's departure or the condition in which he was found. The next item in the report also interested us. It confirmed our opinion of the effectiveness of the German-Spanish cooperation at Huelva. The intervention of the military lawyer, which caused the Germans not to be immediately able to obtain the documents, was undoubtedly a mere act. The British Vice-Consul's request for the documents to be released to him was refused. We had not counted on the Spaniards' Finally, the fact that the envelopes with the letters were returned to us only after the German agent had looked through them himself was also confirmed. The fact that the envelopes looked as if they had not been opened does not surprise me. The same impression would have been given to me if we had not taken certain measures. So, we won. Intelligence swallowed the stuffing whole and accepted the documents as genuine. However, as I said, our victory would have been fruitless if the German General Staff did not agree with the conclusions of intelligence and continue to prepare to repel the landing in Sicily. But this did not happen. The headquarters also swallowed the stuffing and acted accordingly. Information drawn from the German military and naval archives, which we captured in Tambuk, reveals also the reaction to the Operation Minsmith on the part of the German High Command. The results of the operation exceeded our wildest expectations. Our guesses as to the Germans' view of the Allied plans after the fall of Tunisia proved correct. Moreover, we underestimated the difficulties we would face. In the archives, we found a copy of the adopted in February 1943 address of Hitler's High Command to the German troops in Tunisia. It said that the next Allied operation would be in the Mediterranean, and that it would be directed against one of the major islands. In order of probability, they put Sicily in first place, Crete in second place, and Sardinia and Corsica in third place. Thus, we surmised, quite correctly, that from the beginning the Germans were expecting an attack on Sicily. And as our preparations in the Western Mediterranean expanded, the fears of the Germans would find increasing confirmation. We naturally could not prepare for the capture of Crete, since unconquered Sicily stood in the way of it. We were not mistaken in assuming that the German command would reason in this way. Not only that, the appeals stated. It is clear from the reports of the planned Anglo-American landing operations that the enemy intends to resort to deception on the widest scale. The Germans were right here too, and if the chiefs of staff knew that the enemy anticipates deception, I doubt that we would have been authorized for Operation Minsmith. This can be seen from the captured documents. The Germans held such views on the Allied strategy until 9 May 1943, when their point of view completely changed. The message about the documents of Major Martin reached the High Command. On that day, German intelligence apparently submitted a report to the High Command analysing the information contained in the captured letters. This is confirmed by a document which has the next registration number after the document of 15 May, which was cited in the previous chapter. This document from the German archives reads, "To my no, 214043 dated 95-43. The study of the received materials allows us to draw the following conclusions. 1. A major landing of naval troops is expected in the eastern and western parts of the Mediterranean Sea. The object of the operation in the eastern Mediterranean, which is being conducted under Henry Wilson's direction, is the coast near Calais and a stretch of coast south of Cape Killarney. The reinforced 56th Infantry Division is landing at Calama, and a reinforced 5th Infantry Division is landing at Cape Killarney. It is not known whether both divisions will land in their entirety, or whether the operation will be carried out by a fraction of these forces. In the former case, the enemy will need at least 2 to 3 weeks to rest and load personnel, since on 9.543, 2 brigades 56 and divisions are fighting at Enfidel. Judging from the contents of the letter, the enemy intends to do just that. This means that the landing can only begin after a certain period of time. If the landing is intended to be carried out by separate units of both divisions, it could begin at any time, since one brigade of the 56th and one of the 2 brigades of the 5th Division are apparently already in readiness in the original area. So the code name for the landing in the Peloponnese is Husky. The Anglo-American Joint Staff suggested to General Wilson that a simultaneous diversionary operation be carried out on the Dodecanese Islands. As of 23.443, Wilson had not yet made a decision on the matter. The object of the operation to be carried out by General Alexander in the western Mediterranean is not mentioned. A humorous remark in the letter points to Sardinia. The code name for this operation is Brimstone. The intended diversionary object of Operation Brimstone is Sicily. 2. Received information must be kept in the utmost secrecy. Only a strictly limited number of persons may be allowed to familiarize themselves with them. This document gave me a particularly great pleasure. I congratulated myself on the fact that the German agent in Madrid had bothered to send a copy of Lord Mountbatten's letter to Admiral Cunningham to Berlin, even though it seemed insignificant, whereas he had not done so with the letter to General Eisenhower. Why did he do so? Quite possibly because of Lord Mountbatten's hint regarding the failure at Dieppe. This document also showed me that the joke about sardines had achieved its purpose. A humorous remark in the letter points to Sardinia. We hinted at Sardinia in another letter, but the document says nothing about it. A trifle. In a report of this kind, one can forgive such an inaccuracy. The German sense of humor is a great blessing. So, German intelligence did not realize our deception. Now its point of view has been accepted by the High Command. Perhaps we should thank Hitler for this, because from the records of Admiral Dönitz about his conversations with the Führer, we know that Hitler was convinced of the authenticity of the documents of Major Martin. After the disaster in North Africa, Dönitz was sent to Italy to give moral support to Mussolini. When Dönitz returned from Italy, Hitler received him. Dönitz informed Hitler that Mussolini thought the Allies would strike Sicily. The Führer Dönitz's diary. The Führer does not agree with the Deuce that the most likely object of invasion is Sicily. Moreover, in the opinion of the Führer, discovered English documents confirm the assumption of the enemy's intention to strike at Sardinia and the Peloponnese. So Hitler believed that we were going to land in Greece. Having come to this conclusion, the Führer continued to adhere to it firmly, and so firmly that on 23 July, almost 2 weeks after the Allied landing in Sicily, he still believed in it and appointed his favorite General Rommel as commander of the forces that were concentrated in Greece. 25 July Rommel flew to Greece. Soon he was hastily recalled from there and appointed commander of troops in Italy. But it is unfair to blame Hitler alone. On the very day, 14 May, when Hitler expressed disagreement with the opinion of the Deuce, in the official diary Dönitz was registered. that the General Staff of the Land Forces came to the final conclusion that the documents of Major Martin authentic and the landing of the Allies will take place in Sardinia with a simultaneous diversionary strike on Sicily. So by 14 May 1943, the headquarters and the Führer himself, finally convinced of the correctness of the conclusion, prompted them. Operation Minnesmith was a complete success. Now it remained for me to find out what practical benefit it brought to the Anglo-American forces. I do not know what exactly undertook the command of the German land and air forces, but that it was something significant can be judged from the order, according to which the 1st German Panzer Division moved from France across Europe to Tripolis, a city on the Peloponnese Peninsula, extremely favourably located to organise a repulse of the landing at Kalama and Cape Kilini. When you imagine the enormous costs associated with such a transfer of an entire armoured division, you come to the conclusion that this circumstance alone more than compensated for the efforts we invested in Operation Minnesmith. From the German archives, we also learnt that Hitler's foreign ministry was instructed to warn the Turkish government about the transfer of German troops and ships to Greece. We ceased to be surprised at this event when we learnt on what large-scale preparations were being made to repel the landing in Greece. I have already pointed out that I have no information about the measures taken by the Army and Air Command, but judging from the actions of the German Navy, about which we found in the archives more detailed data, the Army and Air Force had made considerable preparations. As on 22 May the naval commander ordered 3 new mines to be laid off the Greek coast, one of them off the coast near Calayum. The German admiral commanding the Aegean area was ordered to take control of the mines set up by the Italians off the western coast of Greece, and German coastal batteries were installed in the territory under Italian control. This is by no means a complete list of the measures urgently taken by the Germans, who were convinced that the entire coast of Greece and the Greek islands were under threat of invasion. In addition, the Germans deployed torpedo boat bases, observation posts, increased patrolling of the approaches to Greece from the sea, and took other precautions. In short, they did everything in their power. Dividends from Operation Minnesmith grew, and that it was our operation that brought them. We established from the documents, from which it was clear that all the above-mentioned orders of the German command were based on the letters of Major Martin. At the beginning of June, the Germans transferred a large group of torpedo boats from Sicily to the Aegean Sea. Our dividends were indeed increasing rapidly. Meanwhile, also in the Western Mediterranean, events were developing most favourably for us. In confirmation, I can refer to the order of the Chief of the General Staff of the German Armed Forces Field Marshal Keitel, issued on 14 June on behalf of Hitler. The order was based on the Germans' belief that we would use Sicily as a diversionary object when striking Sardinia, and therefore it would also be attacked. That this fact was taken into account by the German General Staff is also evident from the positioning of German defences in Sicily. I have already pointed this out. We also found documents which showed that, by special order issued in Hitler's name, a powerful tank force was sent to Corsica in June. From this time, the Germans began to place special emphasis on the consolidation of Sardinia and Corsica, and the northern coast of Sicily was considered next in line. On 9 July, the day before we landed in Sicily, Keitel issued a lengthy document, prepared according to him de Nitz. It assessed not only the situation in the eastern and western Mediterranean, but also characterized the future Allied strategy based on operations in both these areas. The document indicates that a strike on all 3 islands, Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily, as well as a landing in Greece, is quite possible. According to de Nitz, the Allies have in North Africa sufficient forces to conduct both operations, as well as to develop success after the capture of a bridgehead in Greece. He considers the landing of large forces on the coast of Italy is unlikely for the reason that there can be quickly concentrated forces to repel a blow, while in Greece it is not possible to quickly pull up reinforcements and necessary material. De Nitz also takes into account the fact that a landing in Greece would open the way for the Allies to Romanian oil, and would have far-reaching political consequences not only for Romania, but also Finally, Dönitz, with Keitel's agreement, concludes that the strike force in the Western Mediterranean is ready for an attack that could begin at any time, while the forces in the Western Mediterranean are ready for an attack that could begin at any time, while the forces in the Eastern Mediterranean are still in the process of being organized. In the early morning of 10 July, our troops landed in Sicily, but the Germans could not believe that this was a genuine attack. The German High Command had ordered a special post to be established on the shores of the Strait of Gibraltar to watch for convoys which it assumed would be heading for Corsica and Sardinia. The Germans still thought that the landing in Sicily, a diversion, undertaken in order to divert attention from the direction of the main strike. However, by 12 July, the German confidence in the authenticity of the documents of Major Marson began to weaken. The invasion of Sicily lasted for 2 days and did not look like a diversionary operation. We found correspondence between the Commander-in-Chief of the German naval forces in Italy and naval headquarters. The Commander-in-Chief complained bitterly that sending a detachment of torpedo boats in the Aegean Sea weakened the defense of Sicily. There was a chronic shortage of small ships in Sicily, and the dispatch of a whole detachment of gunboats had seriously weakened the defense forces and worsened the situation with the protection of transports. The naval headquarters reply said that intelligence indicated that the Allies were so busy in Sicily that a landing in Greece was unlikely until the Sicilian operation was completed. Therefore, for the time being, the defense of Greece must take a back seat. For these reasons, the additional dispatch of 7 boats from the 11th Flotilla in the Aegean Sea was cancelled. This is the impact of Operation Minsmith on the actions of the German command finally ended, except for those German troops who wasted time in Greece. The results we achieved can be summarized as follows. We deceived the Spaniards who were cooperating with the Germans. We conducted German intelligence both in Spain and in Berlin. We held the German High Command. We deceived Keitel, and finally we deceived Hitler himself, who believed us until the end of July. As for the Eastern Mediterranean, we forced the Germans to put enormous effort into the defense of Greece, including the laying of mines, the deployment of coastal batteries, etc. We forced them to concentrate troops in Greece. These troops included a tank division, which had to be moved across Europe. For the Germans, all these measures were a complete waste of effort and potentially weakened the defense of Sicily and Italy. In the Western Mediterranean, we achieved a strengthening of defences and troops in Corsica and Sardinia at the expense of Sicily. At the same time, the defences in Sicily were largely diverted from those parts of the coast of the island where the Allies actually landed. We forced the Germans to send torpedo boats from Sicily to the Aegean Sea and thus broke a hole in their defences. All this is confirmed by the documents of the time, and I think I can rightly consider that the dividends of Operation Minsmith were truly colossal, much greater than we could have hoped for with all our optimism. And how many British and American lives were saved by the man who was not there, and what effect Major Martin's adventures had on the course of the war, let others determine.